In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural sci-fi detailed metal material. And so this metal material consists of kind of like a noisy metal with some little bits of sci-fi plating. Then there's also these bigger plates here, and that's actually using a displacement to kind of pop out a little bit of the mesh. And then it also has these little glowing bits. And if you'd like to purchase the procedural material to just add it into your projects, you can purchase it with the links in the video description on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. So in the tutorial, once we create the material, I'll show you how to join it together into this custom node group so we can control and customize the look of the material. Now what I'm going to do is open up the side panel, and I'm just going to disable the subdivision here, and that way it's going to be a little bit faster in the viewport so I can show you the custom node group. So we have the scale value to change the size of the entire material. We also have the noise scale, which is controlled by the roughness, and then also this Voronoi scale, which is also a roughness control. Then we have the scale of the lights, so you can have lots of small lights or some big lights. We also have the detail of the lights, and then we also have some values for those large plates. So we have the scale of the large plates. We also have the detail of the large plates. So if I turn up the detail, you can see there's a lot more of them, but the edges look more detailed, or I can turn it down. And then we also have the randomized value of those plates, and then also the amount of the plates. Then we have a few different colors for the metal. So we have color 1, and then we also have color 2. So you can change these to just kind of add a tint to the metal. And then we also have the emission color. So I think red is really cool, but you could also do maybe like a light blue or a green, or yellow is pretty cool. Also orange looks pretty nice. I'm going to keep it as red. Then we also have the emission strength. You can also change the metallic value. We also have the roughness of the material, so it can be more rough or more shiny. Then we have the bump strength, which is just that little bit of surface bump. And then finally the displacement strength to pop out the mesh. So if I just show the subsurf again, you can see that displacement strength is just going to pop out those plates a little bit. So if you'd like to purchase the procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description. You can also check out my ultimate Blender procedural material pack if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist. So before we start, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have. So I went to the add menu, and I just wanted to add this to a cube, and I will scale the cube down to a 0.2, and then I'll just press Ctrl A and apply the scale. So I'm going to rotate the cube over, go to the side and just rotate it down a little bit like that. So now with the cube selected, I'm going to go over here to the modifiers panel, and we're going to add the bevel modifier, and that's going to give it the bevel. So we'll just drag this down here. So there's a tiny little bit of a bevel, and I think I'll turn the amount to like a 0.005. And then I'm going to turn these segments up to 3, and then I will shade the object smooth with the object context menu. Then what I'm going to do is search for the subdivision surface modifier, and I'll turn the levels and viewport all the way up to 4, so the displacements will have more geometry to work with. Now what I'm also going to do is go into edit mode, and I'm going to use the object context menu, and I'm going to subdivide it. You can also press Ctrl E, and then you can click on subdivide. And here in the subdivide settings on the number of cuts, I'm going to type in 10. So it's more subdivided. So again, this will add more geometry for the displacements to pop out the mesh. So I'm going to add a camera, just place the camera looking right at the cube. And to make the camera square, I went to the output properties, and I went to the format, and I set it to 1920 by 1920. Also, if I click over here to go to the object data properties with the camera selected, I turn the focal length up to 90 just to kind of zoom the camera in a bit. Now as for the lighting, let's go into the rendered viewport mode so I can see this in the rendered view. And I'm actually just going to click here and disable the viewport compositor. I'll show you what I did in the compositing, but for now I'm just going to disable it. So for the lighting, I added in the Machine Shop 02 1K HDRI from polyhaven.com. So I'll have a link in the video description if you want to download it. So you can click on the yellow dot next to color, you can choose environment texture, and then just click on the open button and add in the HDRI. And then I turned the strength of it down to a 0.1, so it's not very bright. So it kind of looks like a dark room. Then also if you go here to the render properties and go to the film tab, I turned on the transparent button just so that the background is transparent. So you can do that if you want to. And then if you open up the color management here, I set the view transform to filmic, and I set the look to very high contrast. Now I also added a few different lights. So I added this area light right here. And if you go to the object data properties of the area light, I turned the power up to about 400, and I turned the color to a slight blue color. And then I also added another larger area light on the other side, slightly on the back, and I turned the power to 26 and also gave it a blue color. So I'm going to select the cube and I am in the shading workspace. So I have the 3D viewport over here and I'll go into the rendered view, and then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'll click on new to add a new material, and I can just rename the material to Sci-Fi Detailed Metal. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on. So to enable that, you can click on edit and you can go to the preferences and then go to the add-ons tab, and you can just search for Node and then enable the Node Wrangler add-on. So the first thing that I want to do is create these small details. So for the small details, I'm going to search for a noise texture, and I'll hit Control T with the noise texture selected to add the texture coordinate mapping. And I'm going to use the object coordinates because the object coordinates will place the texture on the object more evenly. Now, if I click and drag to box select these two nodes here, I want to keep my nodes nicely organized. So I'm going to add frames. So I will hit F to add a frame. I can type in mapping and hit enter. So now we just have this frame here and I can drag this down for the mapping. So let's Control Shift select the noise texture to preview it, and we'll change some of the settings. So I'm going to turn the scale up to like a 9, and I'll turn the detail to 12 so it's more detailed, and I'll turn the roughness up to 8.9 so it's very detailed. So that's going to be kind of the base roughness for the shader. Then I also want to add some cool like sci-fi details to look like metal plates. So I'm going to add a Voronoi texture, and let's use the same object coordinates. So we'll put the vector into the vector of the Voronoi, and let's just preview the Voronoi. Now I'm going to Control Shift select it twice to preview the color, and you can see we get these little colored chunks. Now what I'm going to do is change the F1 to F2 instead, so it looks a bit more detailed, and then I'm going to take the distance metric and I'm going to turn this to the Chebyshev. So now you can see we get kind of these squares here, but they have these little kind of sci-fi angles, so that's going to look really cool. And then I'll turn the scale up to like a 10, I'll turn the detail up to like a 1.3, and I'll turn the roughness all the way up to 1. So you can see now it looks very detailed. So now what I want to do is mix these two textures together. So if I click and drag to select both of them, I can press Control 0. That's going to use the Node Wrangler add-on. So what's going to do is add a mix color, and it's going to mix them both together. So I'll now just preview the mix color. And so now we can drag the factor around to blend between them. So I'm going to turn the factor down to like a 0.4. So we're just blending between them using the mix. However, both of these textures are a little bit bright. And so if I just take the mix result and put that into the roughness and then preview the principled shader, let's just take the base color and maybe turn it down a bit. You can see the roughness isn't really how I want. Now what I can do is turn the metallic up to make it look more like metal, but you can see it's just way too rough. And that's because if the values are lighter, it's going to be more rough, but if the values are darker, they're going to be more shiny. So what I want to do between the mix and the texture is I'm going to search for a ramp, and we're going to add a color ramp. And we'll put this right here. So now I can use the color ramp colors to make it lighter and darker. So you can see if it's darker, it's going to be more shiny. So I'm going to drag this tab right over here and drag this tab over here. And this one is going to be kind of like a lighter gray, and this one's going to be a darker gray. And if you do want to use the exact same hex values that I'm using, you can punch in this hex value here for the left side, and then for the right side, you can punch in this hex value right here. Now what I'm going to do is duplicate the color ramp and drop it down here, and we're going to change the colors of this color ramp. So let's just drag this tab right over here, but this tab will keep right about there. And I'm going to make both of these tabs just a little bit lighter. So again, for this color, you can punch in the hex value if you want to, or just play around with it by making it lighter and darker to customize that. And then if you click on the lighter one, again, here's the hex value that I'm going to be using. Now, if I zoom in closely here, you can see it looks a little bit blurred, and that doesn't look correct. And that is because I used the distance. What I'd want to do is use the color instead. So we'll put the color into the factor, and now you can see it's definitely looking more like those little bits of metal, kind of little plates of metal. And that's because the distance here is kind of just like white with some blurry dots, but then the color kind of has that cool like sci-fi greeble look. So make sure you use the color instead, and we'll just preview the principled shader. And now if you kind of look here, just kind of move around to the reflections, you can see we have some really cool details. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all these nodes, and I'll hit F to join them into a frame, and then I can just type in small details and hit enter, just to keep the nodes really nicely organized so we remember what everything does. So now what I want to do is make the texture for the large plates. So for the large plates, I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. We'll put it down here, and I'll Control Shift select it to preview it. And we're going to use the same mapping and texture coordinate. So we'll put the vector into the vector. Then here on the 3D type, I'm going to change this to 4D, and this is going to give us the W value, which we can use to randomize the texture. And then here on the distance metric, we're also going to change this to the Chebyshev. And then let's Control Shift select it twice to preview the color, so you can see we're getting a similar result as we did right up here. However, we're going to use F1 instead of F2, so F2 is a bit more detailed, but F1 isn't quite as detailed. There are just some bigger colors there. Now what I want to do is turn it into a black and white color and make it contrasted. So we're going to search for ramp and add the color ramp and drop it after the Voronoi. And I can just drag these colors together. So let's just drag these both together like that. And now you can see that it's mostly black with little bits of white. So I'm going to drag these tabs pretty close. And then we actually want to go back to the Voronoi and I want to change a few more settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 10 so it's a bit bigger so you can see more of those pieces. And you could turn up the detail if you wanted to, but you can see if I turn up the detail, it's kind of going to look too detailed, and I want to keep it really chunky, so I'm just going to keep the detail level down. Now what I also want to do is go to the add menu, and I want to search for the hue saturation value node, and I'm going to put this in between the Voronoi and the color ramp. And that way we're going to have a value here, so if I turn the value up and down, that's changing the contrast of the texture, so we'll be able to see more of the plates or hide the plates. So we'll box select these nodes, we'll hit F, we're going to call this large plates and hit enter just to keep things really organized. So now what I want to do is mix these both together. So if we select this color ramp and then select the mix color, we'll hit Control 0. That's going to add a mix color. So we'll drag it over here and open it up. And I want to take the bottom one here, so the large plates, and we're going to put that into the factor. And then I'm going to take the mix color and put that into color A. Then here on color B, I can just start to turn this down a bit. You can see that's controlling the color of those plates. And if you want to use the same hex code that I'm using, you can punch in that hex value right there. And so we're going to replace this for the roughness. So we're going to take their mix result and we're going to replace that for the roughness. And let's just preview the principled shader. So if I just navigate right over here to the reflections, let's just take a look at the reflections. You can see here it is before with just the small details, but now we're putting the mix result into the roughness. So now you can see the plates are visible and they have a different roughness value. Now for this mix result, we are going to put that into the base color, so replace it for the base color. And now we're really starting to get a cool looking metal. However, I do want to customize the colors a little bit, so what I'm going to do is search for a ramp, and we're going to add a color ramp and drop this here. And so we can just use this to change the contrast. So if I just preview the color ramp, we can just kind of drag these around. Let's just drag this up here and drag the black tab here, just like that to control the contrast a bit. And I'll preview the principled shader again. And then I also want to just add custom colors so I can customize the colors. So I'm going to search for a mix color, and I'm going to drop the mix color right here. And we're going to put the color into the factor. So now I can take color A and I can adjust the color, and also color B, I can use that to adjust the color as well. And so if you want to use the same hex codes I'm using, you can punch in this value here for color A, and then for color B, you can punch in this color here. It's kind of like a lighter gray. Now, why I'm doing this here instead of just using the color ramp is because this way we'll have these color A and the color B, and so we'll be able to put these into the custom node group to control the colors. Now, what I'm also going to do is just drag these together a little bit so it's a little bit more contrasted. So we can box select these nodes and hit F, and we can just call this base color and hit enter. Now what I also want to do is be able to control the roughness values. So if I search for a hue saturation value and put it right here between the roughness before it goes into the roughness of the shader, we now have this value which I can turn up and down to control the roughness because it's making it lighter or darker. So with the hue saturation value selected, we'll hit F, and we'll just give it a label, and I'll just call this roughness. Now what I also want to do is add the displacement and the bump. So what I'm going to do is search for another Voronoi texture, and we'll plug the vector mapping into the vector of the Voronoi, and let's just preview the Voronoi, and we're going to preview the color. So on the F1 here, we're going to change it to F2. On the distance metric, we're going to change it to the Chebyshev again, so it has those cool details. And I'm going to turn the scale to 24, and I'm going to turn the detail to a 0.2, so it's a bit more detailed. And then I'll turn the lacularity here to just a 3. So I'm going to use this for the bump, but then I'm also going to use this for the emission. First, let's add the emission. So what I want to do is kind of isolate the colors and make it contrasty. So I'm going to add a color ramp and drop this here. And now I can drag the black tab and drag the white tab. And so we can just kind of isolate where we want the emission to be. Now on the linear type here, I'm going to change it to constant. And that way it's going to be much more contrasted. So I'll drag the black tab over and then let's just drag the white tab over. Then I'm going to hold down the control key and click here to add another tab. And this tab I'm going to make fully black. So you can see now we have black, then we have white, and then we have black. So it's going to be mostly dark. But then if we want to add a little bit more detail, we can control click here, drag this over, and so there's going to be even more colors. And then we can control here where the black is and drag this over. So that's just going to add a few more little spots of color. So now we basically have a mask for where we want the lights to show up. So let's just go to the principled shader, and we're going to open up the emission, and we're going to put the color ramp color into the emission color. So let's just preview the principled shader now. And then here we need to turn the strength up a little bit. So I'm going to turn this up to a 4. But I do want to change the colors and make it customizable. So you could change the colors here by just dragging around the color ramp to change the color. But instead I want to be able to use this outside of a node group and make it customizable. So what I'm going to do is search for the mix color. So we'll drop the mix color right here after the color ramp, but before the principled shader. And I'm going to put the color into the factor. So now what I can do is take color A and make it fully black, and then take color B and make it whatever color you want. So I'm going to make it kind of like a red color. And that way we'll have this color B here, which we can control outside of the node group. And if you want to use the same exact color I'm using, it's kind of like a lightish red color. Here's the hex code if you do want to punch that in. Now real quick, if you want to see what I have in the compositor, we can go to the compositing workspace, and I'll just close this tab here. So here's the compositor. So you want to click on use nodes, and then I added this glare node, and I set the type to bloom. I set the quality to high, and then you can see I turned the size down a little bit, and I have the strength at 1. And then also I added this alpha over here, and that is just to make the background fully black. So that's the compositing. So I'm going to go back to the shading workspace, and then if I scroll right over here and click on the drop down arrow, we can turn the compositor type to always. So you can see it's adding that glare, and it's also making the background black. So that's what I have for the compositing, and it really does make the metal look a lot more interesting. So what we can do is box select these two nodes. We can hit F, and we can type emission. So now let's add the bump. So what I'm going to do is search for a bump node, and we're going to drop this here. But then I also want to search for another mix color because we want to mix two colors together. So I'll drop the mix here, and the result can go into the height value. So now we're going to mix this Voronoi. So we're going to put the color into the bottom one, and then we're going to mix it with this other Voronoi right here. So we're going to take this Voronoi and put it into A. So the large plates is going to go into A. Then this bottom one here, which is very detailed, is going to go into B. And then as for the factor to control what parts is this Voronoi and what parts are this Voronoi, we're going to use this color ramp right here. So we'll put the color into the factor. So let's just preview the mix here. So you can see because we put this color ramp here into the factor, you can see some spots are using this more detailed Voronoi. So you can see this is more detailed, whereas the other spots are using the less detailed Voronoi. So you can see it's more detailed here and then like less detailed over here. So that is going to go into the bump to kind of give it some surface bump. But let's put the bump normal into the normal, the principled shader, and I can preview the principled shader. So now if you kind of look at the edges of things, it does just look a little bit bumpy. So we're now going to Control Shift select the principled shader just to see the final material. So we're going to box select these two nodes. We're going to hit F. We're going to type in bump and hit enter. And then finally, I want to add some displacement. So what we're going to do is search for the displacement node, and we'll drop this here under the principled shader. And so I just want to have these large plates here, kind of these darker plates be popping out. So we can use this color ramp here. So we're going to take this color ramp color, and we're going to put this into the height value of the displacement. And then the displacement here can go into the displacement of the material output, and let's just Control Shift select the principled shader. Now you can't really see it doing anything, and that's because I need to open up the side panel. We're going to go here to the material settings, and we're going to scroll way down here. We're going to go to settings and go to surface, and under bump only, we need to change this to displacement and bump. And this is telling the material that it can use the displacements. So now you can kind of see all of those plates are popping out, and I'm going to turn the scale down to make it less strong. So I'm going to turn it to a 0.004, just a 0.004. So now if I kind of zoom in here, you can just see those plates there are popping out a little bit. And of course, if your object isn't very detailed, if it doesn't have very much geometry, it's kind of just going to look blobby. So that's why I'm adding the subsurf modifier, because the subdivision surface modifier will give it more geometry. But of course, this is optional. You don't need to use the displacement if you don't want to. Now there is one more thing that I want to do to this material before I finish it. So if I kind of zoom in here, you can see the bumps just don't look that good. They're kind of small and hard to see, and they look kind of grainy. So what I'm going to do is turn the filter width to 1. And if I turn it to 1, now you can see they're much more visible. Now if I turn the filter width up even more, you can kind of see they're kind of big and blocky. So if you want to get that effect, you could maybe even turn it to just like a 3 or something. I'm just going to turn it to like a 1. So that is it for the procedural material. So let's now join it together into a custom node group to control the customizable values of the material. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all the nodes except the material output, and I'll hit Control G to join it together into a node group, and I'll hit the tab key to go outside the node group, and I'll drag the node group over here, and I can drag it out to make it bigger, and then I will copy the material name and I will paste it here into the node group. So let's now hit the tab key to go into the node group, and I'm going to hit the N key to open up the side panel, and on the group sockets here on the group tab, I'm going to double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to shader because I like that better. So now right over here on the left side, we have this group input, and we can plug up all the values to the group input, and then we'll be able to control those values outside of the node group. So the mapping is plugged up to all the textures, so the scale value will control the size of the entire material. So I'm going to put the scale into the extra socket here, and then if I click on the scale value, if I go outside the node group, you can see it's going to be 3 values, but I just want it to be 1 value, so we're going to click on the type here, and we're going to change it to float, and then what we need to do is turn the default value back to 1, and then if I hit tab to go outside the node group, we want to turn the scale back to 1. So let's go back into the node group. So now what I want to do is drag the node group right up here, and what you could do if you want to is duplicate the group input, tab multiple of them, and then you can plug up the custom values to the different group inputs. In this case, for this material, I'm just going to use 1, so I'll just drag the group input right over here, and I want to take the scale of the noise and the scale of the Voronoi and put those into the extra sockets, and then I'm just going to double click on them to rename them, so noise scale, and this one here, Voronoi scale. Then I want to control the lights, so I'm going to drag the group input right down here underneath this Voronoi, and we're going to take the scale and the detail, and we're going to put both of these values into the extra sockets, and then this one I'm going to call lights scale, and then this one here I'm going to call lights detail. Then I want to control those black plates, so we're going to drag the group input right here behind the large plates. And we're going to take the scale of this and the detail of this and put both of these into the extra sockets. And let's just rename these. And I'm going to rename this to large plate scale and then also large plates detail. And then I also want to take the W value and put that into the extra socket. And this one we're going to rename to large plates randomize. And then what I want to do is take the hue saturation value and we're going to put the value into the extra socket. Let's scroll down here. And this one we're going to call large plates amount, so we can control the amount of them. Then I want to control the colors, so we'll drag the group input way up here and we can take color A, put that into the extra socket, and the same thing for color B. And I'm going to call this metal color 1, and this one's going to be metal color 2. And then I want to control the emission color, so we're going to drag this right down here to the mix here with the orange color, and we're going to put this into the extra socket, and we're going to rename this to emission color. Then to control the emission strength, we can go here to the principled shader, and we'll take the strength value and put that into the extra socket, and this we can just keep at the name called emission strength. Then I want to control a few more fundamental values like the metallic, so I'll put this into the extra socket. Then I also want to control the roughness, so we can take this roughness here, so the hue saturation value, we'll put that all the way down here into the extra socket, and we're going to rename this to roughness. And then I want to control the bump strength, so we're going to take this strength value here from the bump and put that into the extra socket. And then finally the displacement scale, so we'll put that into the extra socket. And let's rename these two last ones here. So this one here I'm going to call bump strength, and then the last one here I'm going to call displacement strength. So let's hit the N key to close the side panel, and I'll drag the group input back here, and then I'll hit the tab key to go outside the node group. So we have the scale to change the size of the material, then we also have the noise scale and the Voronoi scale, then we have the light scale, and then we can also change the detail of the lights, then we can also change the size of the large plates, we also have the detail of the large plates and the randomize of the large plates, and also the amount of the large plates. So you can have none of them or a lot of them. Then we have the different colors, so there's two different colors for the metal, so you can kind of change the tint of the metal, so color 1 and 2, and then you can change the emission color, so I think a light blue is pretty cool, or like red or yellow or something. Then we also have the strength of the emission, you can also change the metallic value, and then there's also the roughness, the bump strength, and then finally the displacement strength to pop out the mesh. So if I just open up the side panel and just show the subdivision, now if I zoom in here you can see the metal's kind of popping out. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to purchase the procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. You can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials. And to learn how to create more materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist. So I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you for watching.